On May 13, 1846, the United States Congress declared war against Mexico. Over the next 2 years, the U.S. would conquer huge swaths of northern Mexico, ultimately seizing vast territories that stretched from the southernmost tip of Texas all the way to the Pacific Ocean. But after some initial setbacks, American troops under General Zachary Taylor and General Stephen Kearny pushed south. Some prominent figures like Massachusetts Senator Charles Sumner argued that the war was driven by Southern expansionists who wanted to acquire new lands for slavery. Throughout the conflict, there had been diplomatic efforts to find a peaceful resolution. But it was in this final year of the war that peace negotiations intensified. As the U.S. prepared to annex the recently acquired territories, the issue of slavery resurfaced. The admission of new states often involved the question of whether those states would be slave or free. The Treaty's stipulations regarding citizenship rights for Mexicans in the ceded territories were not fully honored by the United States. Historians continue to assess the war's causes, its conduct, and its lasting impacts. Studying the war prompts us to consider the human cost of conflict, the struggles of individuals caught in the crossfire of national ambitions, and the lasting impacts of territorial disputes. Examining the experiences of soldiers, civilians, and leaders during this era helps us understand the human face of war and its far-reaching consequences. Ultimately, the story of the war between the U.S. and Mexico is a complex tapestry woven with threads of ambition, conflict, and lasting consequences. It's a narrative that continues to resonate today, reminding us of the complexities of history and the enduring legacies of war. For example, there's been much discussion about the role of manifest destiny in driving U.S. expansionism and the war with Mexico. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more updates on our latest releases. Thanks for watching. Scholars continue to debate the extent to which internal U.S. politics, particularly debates over slavery, influenced the war. The treatment of Mexicans living in the territories acquired by the United States has also been a subject of historical investigation. The war's impact on Mexican society and its territorial integrity remains a significant part of Mexico's collective memory. Memorials, museums, and historical sites across Mexico commemorate the war and its aftermath. Understanding this war is crucial for comprehending the history of both nations. It provides insights into the rise of the United States as a continental power and the profound effects of territorial conquest. The war also offers a lens through which to examine issues like manifest destiny, slavery, and the changing dynamics of power in the 19th century. Additionally, the exact delimitation of the border was left somewhat ambiguous. In response, Mexico initially sought arbitration, then eventually took the matter to the International Court of Justice at The Hague in the early 20th century. However, these post-treaty disputes were minor compared to the upheaval caused by the war itself. The war fundamentally altered the geopolitical landscape of North America. The United States emerged as a dominant force from the Pacific Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico. This vast expanse of territory secured American interests and provided a significant boost to the U.S. economy. Meanwhile, Mexico lost nearly half of its national territory. The extent of the loss is highlighted by comparing the size of the current U.S. state of Texas with the area Mexico ceded. The war also had profound social and cultural consequences. The influx of new lands led to a surge in U.S. population westward. This wave of migration transformed the demographics of the western states and set in motion the displacement and dispossession of indigenous populations. The war was also a pivotal moment in shaping the future of slavery in the U.S. The admission of California as a free state contributed to a growing divide between the North and the South. This divide would eventually erupt into the American Civil War just over a decade later. With the vast territories gained from Mexico, the balance of power between slave and free states hung in the balance. The compromise reached was the admission of California as a free state, along with the enactment of the Fugitive Slave Act. This act strengthened measures to capture and return runaway slaves, a provision that further inflamed tensions over slavery. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, signed on February 2, 1848, officially ended the conflict. Exact figures are debated, but estimates suggest that total deaths might exceed 250,000 of these. Around 13,000 to 15,000 were American military personnel and perhaps another 11,000 Mexican soldiers. Civilian losses are harder to determine, though likely far more extensive. Disease played a significant role in the death toll, highlighting the challenges faced by armies in the 19th century. Medical care was rudimentary, sanitation poor, and basic public health measures lacking. This led to outbreaks of diseases like cholera, typhoid, and smallpox, which cut down entire units at times. For instance, the Battle of Chapultepec, part of the Siege of Mexico City, saw heavy casualties not only from combat, but also from disease. The siege itself claimed many lives due to inadequate sanitation and rampant disease. Similarly, the Battle of Veracruz in 1846 resulted in high numbers of deaths due to disease, rather than direct combat. While records are incomplete, it's clear that disease was a constant threat throughout the war. Both militaries grappled with outbreaks, leading to mass casualties. The lack of medical knowledge and resources in the 19th century turned routine campaigns into deadly sieges. The war thus stands as a grim reminder of the toll that disease can take on soldiers and civilians alike. Under its terms, Mexico ceded vast territories to the United States, including nearly all of present-day California, Nevada, Utah, and parts of New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, Texas, and Wyoming. In return, the U.S. paid Mexico $15 million and assumed $3.25 million. In claims of American citizens against the Mexican government, however, as the war intensified, the anti-slavery Liberty Party merged with the Democratic Party, bolstering President Polk's political base. By 1847, the election became a referendum on Polk and his handling of the Mexican War. His opponents nominated former President Martin Van Buren as an alternative. Nonetheless, Polk easily won re-election. Anti-slavery Democrats, pro-slavery Democrats, and expansionists all united behind him. Public opinion had turned decisively in favor of Manifest Destiny. By the end of 1846, American flags flew over the cities of Monterrey and Veracruz. Meanwhile, a Third Army, led by General Winfield Scott, sailed into the port of Veracruz in March 1847 and began the long march inland to Mexico City. Despite occasional defeats, Scott's army pressed on. One of the most decisive battles of the war took place at Cerro Gordo on April 1847. There, American artillery played a pivotal role in securing victory. For his tactical brilliance during the siege, General Winfield Scott was made general of the army, while Zachary Taylor was sent to take command of the 1848 presidential campaign. But despite the war's outcome, it wasn't quite what either side had expected when they went to war. When the U.S. entered the conflict, the general sentiment among its leadership was that it would be a short affair. President James K. Polk believed that his newly appointed General Winfield Scott would breeze through Mexico City within 3 months. What actually transpired was a costly and protracted campaign filled with setbacks, controversies, and strategic brilliance. So how did the U.S. go to war with Mexico? Why did it take so long to win? And what impact did the war have on both nations? This is the war that changed the border forever. In the immediate aftermath of the declaration of war, U.S. forces crossed into northern Mexico. Their advance was met with fierce resistance. As the war dragged on, anti-war sentiment began to grow in the U.S., especially in the northern states. Many Americans questioned the true purpose of the conflict. In February 1848, General Scott's troops occupied the city of Mexico. After the treaty, however, there was one last hurdle to clear: the question of slavery. The war between the U.S. and Mexico resulted in an astounding number of casualties. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo brought an official end to hostilities. But in the years following, questions about borders and rights lingered. Today, the legacy of the war continues to be debated and examined. By exploring the details of this conflict, we gain a deeper appreciation for the complexities of American history and its global implications. If you enjoyed this video, check out more content where we cover various conflicts throughout history. May 1846, Northern Mexico. A detachment of 40 American dragoons ride out from the base camp of General Zachary Taylor's army to scout the area around the contested borderlands. They are accompanied by a guide who is eager to lead them deep into enemy territory. The attack resulted in 3 American deaths and a dozen wounded. One army, numbering over 7,000 men, would enter Mexican territory through Texas, marching west and south toward Mexico City. All the while, word spread throughout the region that Taylor's army was coming. Without more supplies, his army would be forced to retreat north of the Rio Grande. And so on May 8, 1846, Taylor's troops engaged the enemy in the first major battle of the war. The site of the battle, a wide, flat field covered in tall grass, would come to be known as Palo Alto. Hearing this, many Mexican army recruits took up arms and joined him in the field, though the war would be controversial from the start. These two victories in the remote borderlands would go largely unnoticed by most Americans. But as Taylor continued his advance into northern Mexico, the nation would soon learn that war was no longer just something happening somewhere else. It was happening here. Beside him stand Mexican General Arista and American interpreter Lieutenant John S. Webster. To his right sits a pair of seated Mexican officers, prisoners of war. Taylor's job now is to advance his troops further south and secure more territory for the United States. But to do that, he needs supplies, lots of supplies. The Americans, meanwhile, were mostly infantrymen. The Mexican army had them outnumbered, 2-1. But the Americans had better artillery, and their position was more defensible. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please subscribe. At dusk, as darkness fell over the battlefield, flying artillery, a type of light, mobile cannon, was crucial to American victory at Palo Alto. The Mexican army pushed forward, but whenever they got too close, the American guns pounded them with deadly accuracy. To make matters worse, the Mexican army was inexperienced and undisciplined. When the Lancers dismounted and attacked on foot, they fared no better. After several hours of fighting, the Mexicans retreated. By mid-May, Taylor's army had reached the mouth of the Resaca de la Palma, a large stream choked with brush and trees. If the Mexican army regrouped and attacked again, his troops might not be able to hold their ground. So he decided to press his advantage. The following day, May 9th, Taylor's troops marched just over a mile north to the Resaca de la Palma, or Palm Creek, where the Mexican army had taken up a new position. Once again, Taylor set up his artillery and opened fire on the Mexican lines. The Mexicans responded with gunfire from their own artillery and small arms. Then, the American infantry and dragoons charged. The Lancers attempted to stop them with their bayonets and sabers, but were forced to retreat when Taylor's flying artillery smashed their ranks. As the Mexican Lancers fell back, American soldiers pursued them into the thick brush and captured several artillery pieces. The rest of the Mexican army soon surrendered, and Taylor's troops had secured the Rio Grande. There they encountered the first major obstacle to their advance, the Mexican army. Another force of nearly 3,000 soldiers headed toward New Mexico and California. A third, smaller body of troops would sail into the Gulf of Mexico and capture Veracruz. From there, they would march inland to join the main American force before proceeding to the capital. In charge of the invasion of northern Mexico was Major General Zachary Taylor, commander of the U.S. Army's 2nd Division stationed in Texas. Taylor was a seasoned military officer known for his pragmatism and toughness, qualities he had developed while serving 26 years in the Army and fighting in the Black Hawk War and the First Seminole War. His command consisted of both regular Army soldiers and newly recruited volunteers. When President Polk received the news, he immediately convened a cabinet meeting. Despite his advisors' concerns that the incident may have been a border skirmish rather than a deliberate attack, Polk was convinced that American blood had been shed on American soil. He informed his friend, Senator Thomas Butler, King of Louisiana, that war with Mexico had become inevitable. "We must now either fight or submit," he said. "I will not submit." On May 13, 1846, Congress declared war. For their part, the Americans were eager to seize more territory in the region. Many believed it was their God-given right to expand across the continent, and they called this idea manifest destiny. Others, including some members of President James K. Polk's cabinet, wanted to provoke the Mexicans into declaring war. That way, they argued, Congress would be less likely to resist future calls for funding and more likely to approve the acquisition of even more land. Provocation or not, the inevitable conflict would change both nations forever. But what the guide does not tell them is that the Mexicans have been expecting their arrival. Ambushed by a large force of Mexican Lancers, the Americans fought back with pistols and rifles until help arrived in the form of more American soldiers. This skirmish was the first battle of the Mexican War, and although it did not result in any major casualties, it exemplified the tensions that had been building between the United States and Mexico for years. In 1845, the United States had officially annexed the Republic of Texas, much to the dismay of Mexico, which still considered Texas its own. As hostilities began along the Rio Grande, an emissary from President Polk traveled to Mexico City to purchase the northern territories of Mexico, which included present-day California, Nevada, Utah, most of Arizona, and half of New Mexico. Mexico refused to sell. Meanwhile, the U.S. moved thousands of troops into the disputed borderlands between the Nueces River, claimed by Mexico as Texas's southern boundary, and the Rio Grande, claimed by the U.S. The disputed area was sparsely populated, lawless, and essentially useless to Mexico, which saw the Americans moving into it as an unforgivable provocation. Mexico had no intention of allowing the Americans to take even a single step farther south. On April 25, 1846, Mexican cavalry attacked a U.S. patrol north of the Rio Grande. The United States then launched a three-pronged military campaign against Mexico. Taylor advanced slowly down the Rio Grande, establishing supply depots and supply trains every 15 miles, which in turn required the construction of bridges and roads. Under normal circumstances, Taylor would have attempted to avoid a battle, but his supply train was only equipped to last his troops for days. By May, the Mexican army had grown to over 3,000 men, almost double the size of Taylor's force. When the sun rose the next morning, Taylor deployed 2 of his artillery pieces and opened fire on the advancing Mexican army. Despite his tactical victory, Taylor's position was precarious. The battles of Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma were the first engagements in a war that would see thousands of American and Mexican soldiers killed or wounded. Zachary Taylor, commander of the U.S. forces in northern Mexico, stands in front of a crowd gathered near the Resaca de la Palma. Hi, I'm a historian. Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to look at the war between the United States and Mexico. As always, if you want more information, check out the description. And now, let's go back to the war. Early victories are being met with wild celebrations across the United States. Newspapers praise the valor of General Taylor and the young officers under him. Some of these men will become Civil War legends, including Ulysses S. Grant. He occupies Matamoros on March 18, 1846. 2 months later, Taylor's force is at the village of Palo Alto. There they face a larger Mexican army under General Arista. In June 1846, a group of American settlers in Sonoma declare California an independent republic. He is stationed off the coast of the Alta California and charged with securing the Pacific coast in the event of war. Sloat wastes no time, but less than a month later, the Californios strike back. In late 1846, he is joined by General Zachary Taylor and his army of about 8,000 men. Taylor maintains his policy of not interfering in Mexican politics, but the war is far from over. Santa Anna had returned to power. Mexico remains defiant, and the bloodiest battles still lie ahead. If you did, please subscribe and leave me a comment. I would love to hear what you thought. Check out my social media for more information about the war. Meanwhile, Kearney pushes forward from California toward New Mexico. And remember, if you want to support my work, please consider becoming a member. Thanks for watching. He also keeps Polk informed of his operations. He hopes to join Taylor and form a base of operations against the Mexican army. But Kearney's army is exhausted and undersupplied. When they reach New Mexico, they learn that American supply trains are also on the way. But before the supplies arrive, the troops must fight. On December 6, 1846, Kearney's troops clash with Mexican lancers at the Battle of San Pascual. It is one of the bloodiest engagements in California. 1/3 of Kearney's force is lost. The Americans are overwhelmed and forced to retreat. The remaining Americans are forced to flee into the mountains. There they stay for 10 days until the supply train arrives. On December 1846, Kearney is forced to defend his headquarters at San Diego. He repels several attacks by Californio forces. On November 9, 1846, a large Californio force attacks the Americans at the Battle of San Bernardino. Together, Kearney and Stockton occupy key locations in California, but Mexican Californios continue to harass them. By January 1847, the situation has stabilized. Kearney and Stockton are preparing to launch an offensive when news arrives that General Taylor has occupied Mexico City. The threat of a full-scale American invasion convinces the Californios to abandon their resistance. The people of California accept American rule. Within days, the Californios seize Los Angeles, but their victory is short-lived. American reinforcements arrive, led by Commodore Robert F. Stockton and General Stephen W. Kearny. These include Monterey, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, but the Californios aren't ready to give up. The Californians are soon driven from the city. By January 1847, American forces have retaken Los Angeles and other key locations. The Bear Flag Revolt ends in failure. Soon, however, the city falls to American forces. All the territory west of Texas is secured. On July 7, 1846, he sails into Monterey Bay and raises the American flag. He proclaims U.S. control over California. With little opposition, American forces occupy key coastal cities. They raise a crudely drawn flag featuring a single star and a bear. Led by commanders like Flores, they launch a counteroffensive. Fighting continues throughout the summer. But in mid-August, the Bear Flag rebels are forced to retreat inland. But since 1836, it has been virtually independent. They find refuge in Los Angeles under the protection of Mexican General Pico. They call themselves Bear Flaggers. This short-lived rebellion is later known as the Bear Flag Revolt. At the time, California is part of Mexico. The Mexican central government is thousands of miles away and has limited control. The local military commander, General Jose Maria Mora, is a Californio, someone of Mexican descent, born in California. He prefers to maintain cordial relations with the Americans rather than risk conflict. Unfortunately, other Mexican officials don't share this attitude. They want to assert greater control over California and limit American immigration. Tensions grow between the Californios and the American settlers. On June 14, 1846, a group of American settlers revolt against Mexican rule. They raise the Bear Flag and declare independence. They capture the town of Sonoma and execute 2 Mexican soldiers who refuse to switch sides. On May 8, 1846, the two sides clash in the first battle of the war on American soil. The Mexicans attack the American camp in the dark of night, but they are repelled. The following day, the two armies clash again at the Resaca de la Palma. Over the next few days, Taylor's artillery bombards the city. Taylor's troops win another victory and drive the Mexicans away. Taylor's success raises fears in Washington that he might try to seize Monterey, the key city in northern Mexico. Taylor doesn't know this, but President Polk keeps him in the dark about his secret negotiations with Santa Anna. Polk wants Taylor to remain focused on winning battles, not politics. Across the border in Mexico, the news of defeat is demoralizing. By mid-May, Taylor's army is marching toward Monterey. His force consists of about 6,000 troops, including 1,600 sailors. Opposed to him is a Mexican force of nearly 10,000 soldiers under Generals Pedro de Ampudia and Juan Navarro. The country's best general, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, lives in exile in Cuba. Many Mexicans call for his return. The United States has just gone to war with Mexico. For the next month, Taylor marches south, chasing the retreating Mexicans. On June, he arrives outside the walls of Monterey. He hopes to weaken Mexico internally and encourage civil war. The bombardment does much to break down the city walls. On September, Taylor launches a general assault. House-to-house fighting rages throughout the city. The streets run with blood, but Taylor's troops prevail. The Mexican generals agree to surrender the city. Taylor's victory at Monterey is a turning point in the war. It gives Polk a much-needed boost at home. It also weakens Santa Anna's position in Mexico. Santa Anna had staked his reputation on the defense of Monterey. Now, his authority is challenged by those who believe that he should resign. But Santa Anna refuses to quit. He vows to fight to the end. Political instability continues to plague the country. President Mariano Paredes is widely unpopular. Then he asks for permission to visit Washington to finalize the deal. Polk agrees. The war effort lacks funding, coordination, and unity. There is no draft or system for training soldiers. Military equipment is scarce and of poor quality. The year is 1846. President Polk is eager to capitalize on this disarray. News of the declaration reaches Taylor on May 13th. 5 days later, Taylor receives orders to press on to Monterey. But when Santa Anna travels to New Orleans, he learns that he is wanted for a murder that happened during the First Mexican War. His secret plan is to invite Santa Anna back to the United States and then use him to take control of the Mexican government. In February 1846, while traveling in Cuba, Santa Anna receives a letter from the U.S. minister. It proposes a deal. If Santa Anna is allowed to return home through the U.S. naval blockade, he will be guaranteed safe passage and become the president of Mexico. Polk also promises to end the war on good terms. California and New Mexico are under American control. Northern Mexican cities like Monterrey have been occupied. Santa Anna agrees. He returns to Mexico in disguise and takes control of the Mexican government. Too many Mexicans have grown weary of the war. They prefer peace even under Santa Anna. Once in power, Santa Anna immediately begins negotiating with Polk. He sends a letter saying that he wants peace. He invites Santa Anna to come to the United States for talks. The two leaders meet in Washington. Santa Anna makes it clear that he wants to keep Texas, but otherwise he is willing to concede all of Mexico's northern territories to the United States. The discussions seem to be going well. He flees to Washington and then Europe. Polk announces that the war will continue until Mexico is willing to recognize the Rio Grande as the southern border of Texas. Secret negotiations fail and hostilities resume. While this drama unfolds, General Taylor continues his advance south from Texas into Mexico. On April 25, 1846, Congress declares war. Meanwhile, 2,000 miles away, a new theater of war is unfolding in the distant, sun-drenched lands of California. Word of the rebellion reaches Commodore John D. Sloat of the U.S. Navy. On October 9, 1846, a detachment of U.S. Marines under Lieutenant Colonel William S. Sherman enters Los Angeles unopposed. This ends all organized resistance in Southern California. As this happens in California, General Taylor continues his advance south from Texas. When Kearny is finally able to continue his march, he is joined by Colonel Stephen Watts Kearny. As 1846 comes to a close, the United States has made significant territorial gains. I hope you enjoyed today's video. As an editor for a major American news outlet once wrote, "Few events in the history of nations have been more spectacular, more brilliant, in all respects both as a military operation and a feat of combined action by land and sea than the investment and capture of Vera Cruz." To do this, he'd need to launch a massive amphibious landing at the port city of Vera Cruz, the gateway to central Mexico. The following day, over 12,000 troops, including regulars, Marines, and volunteers, landed on the beaches near Vera Cruz without a single shot being fired. A week after the fall of Vera Cruz, he began the arduous march to Mexico City, but Santa Anna refused to even meet with him. Instead, he informed Scott that he was willing to make peace, but only if the Americans withdrew to their original positions along the Rio Grande. The city was heavily fortified, protected by high walls, and armed with over 600 cannons. The castle loomed over the landscape like a grim specter as American forces approached. On the morning of September 12th, U.S. forces launched a brutal bombardment, firing 3,000 cannon and mortar rounds until the castle's defenses were crippled. But even as Americans reveled in their good fortune, sober voices began asking what would become of the nearly 500,000 inhabitants of Mexican California and Texas. It was certainly a watershed moment in American history, but it wasn't the only one. If you're looking for something new to watch, you'll find dozens of fascinating documentaries on every branch of the U.S. military, as well as biographical documentaries about many of America's greatest leaders, including a couple about George Washington. There's something for everyone at Wondrium, and it's all included with your Curiosity Stream subscription. And now, it's time for your assignment. Check out this playlist for more on the Mexican War, or this other playlist for more on the U.S. Army. You can also browse recent uploads on my channel page. As always, thanks for watching. For Polk, winning the war was the culmination of a lifelong dream, but in the process, he had broken his nation. Cheers for Manifest Destiny quickly turned to boos. In the North, anti-slavery advocates blamed President Polk for deliberately provoking the war in order to acquire more territory to expand slavery, while Southerners accused him of abandoning his duty to slaveholders by failing to support the Confederacy. In the end, Polk walked so that Jefferson Davis could run. Afterward, American infantry stormed the hill. The defenders resisted fiercely, but were eventually overwhelmed. Legend holds that the last surviving cadet wrapped himself in the Mexican flag and leaped from the battlements rather than surrender. Be that as it may, the defenders' courage was undeniable. One participant later recalled, "We never saw such havoc and destruction among the enemy. Officers fell, as well as privates, and they kept up an incessant fire upon us, desperately discharging their muskets, until they were loaded with grape and canister." The horrid yells of the Mexicans as they fell could not be distinguished from the roar of the cannon. The main line of defense was the impressive Chapultepec Castle, perched atop a hill overlooking the city. That same day, the Mexican the first Mexican dictator, Miguel Hidalgo, realizing that further resistance was futile, signed an agreement ending the war. The next day, September 14th, American troops entered the capital. According to one American newspaper, the city's inhabitants greeted the invaders with a mixture of fear and jubilation. Masses of people crowded the streets, some waving green and red Mexican flags, others displaying the white flag of truce. At midday, the U.S. flag was raised over the National Palace. The treaty formally ending the war would not be signed until February 2, 1848. But the effective conclusion of hostilities just 2 days prior stunned the Mexican public and government. After months of resistance, the nation's capital had fallen. Santa Anna fled and resigned. The Mexican military was in ruins, and much of the country's civilian infrastructure lay in tatters. It was garrisoned by over 3,000 troops, including many teenage cadets from the nearby Mexican Military Academy. Nevertheless, Scott decided to press forward. Scott, naturally, refused. Santa Anna then vowed that he would fight to the death rather than see Mexico City fall into American hands. So Scott had no choice but to continue marching on the capital. The journey was fraught with peril, with American forces having to cut through mountainous terrain and encounter stiff resistance from Mexican forces along the way. But on April 1847, American troops clashed with Santa Anna's army at the Battle of Cerro Gordo. Santa Anna had fortified a steep mountain pass and was confident it would halt the American advance. But Scott's engineers found a narrow path through the hills, allowing U.S. troops to flank the Mexican position. The surprise attack caught the Mexicans off guard and led to a decisive American victory. More than 6,800 Mexican soldiers were taken prisoner, and Santa Anna barely escaped with his life. This battle is often overlooked in histories of the war. But it was the largest American victory during the conflict and paved the way for the fall of Mexico City. As one writer for Harper's Weekly later described, the whole thing was done in an able and masterly manner, like a well-rehearsed play, each actor knowing what to do at the instant it was to be done. Here, Mexican forces fought valiantly to defend the approaches to Mexico City. The fighting was fierce, but again, American firepower and tactics prevailed, resulting in thousands of Mexican soldiers either killed or captured. Among the defenders were many young American officers who would become famous during the coming Civil War, including Robert E. Lee and George B. McClellan. McClellan would later publish an illustrated account of the war, which contained a colored plate depicting the capture of a Mexican general at the Battle of Contreras. The operation was executed with surprising precision. Within days, American artillery encircled the city. Scott ordered a full-scale siege rather than a costly assault, and on March 21st, massive siege cannons, like the 80-pounder Old Ironsides, pounded Veracruz for nearly 3 weeks. Civilian casualties mounted, and Mexican morale faltered. On March 27th, the city surrendered, opening the road to Mexico City. He appointed General Winfield Scott, who, despite being a veteran of the War of 1812 and successful commander during the Seminole Wars, was still considered untested in major conflicts. On March 9, 1847, the first elements of Scott's army, consisting of about 4,000 men, arrived off the coast of Veracruz. These included about 2,500 regulars, 1,000 Marine infantry, and 500 volunteer cavalrymen. His force would swell to over 12,000 by the time the siege began. Few indeed, as we wrap up our series on the Mexican War. We'll look at how American forces under General Winfield Scott stormed one of the most heavily fortified cities in the Western Hemisphere, ultimately forcing the nation of Mexico to surrender and ending the war. All that and more coming up on this episode of the History Guy. By early 1847, President James K. Polk approved a bold new strategy, a direct assault on Mexico's capital. On March 1847, Scott launched the first large-scale amphibious invasion in American history. Scott now faced the difficult task of supplying, feeding, and moving his large force inland toward Mexico City. With the capital within reach, Scott decided to send an envoy to Santa Ana, offering terms of surrender. The following month, while traveling between Puebla and Mexico City, his army encountered strong Mexican resistance at the towns of Contreras and Churubusco on August 1847. After the battles of Contreras and Churubusco, Scott paused to resupply and prepare for the final assault on Mexico City. On September 12 to 13, 1847, the climactic Battle of Chapultepec was fought. With the castle in American hands, the gates to Mexico City were effectively open. In the United States, victory sparked massive celebrations. And there you have it, the entire Second Mexican War in less than 4 minutes. After the fall of Mexico City in September 1847, the war's fighting largely ceased, but diplomacy had only just begun. The United States occupied the capital and awaited formal negotiations. In Mexico, it was seen as a national humiliation. It was also the culmination of decades of mounting tensions and competing ambitions. To understand what happened in 1846 and 1847, we have to go back much further. By the early 1800s, Spain had lost much of its North American empire. When he arrived, the territory was still a part of Mexico. Vast stretches of territory were simply too large to effectively defend. So Mexico agreed to end the war. The country lost nearly half of its territory and gained nothing in return. Every year on May 5th, Mexicans celebrate the Battle of Puebla, a small victory against the invading Americans. The event is known as Cinco de Mayo, or the 5th of May, and is celebrated with parades, music, food, and a sense of pride in Mexican heritage. The war was highly unpopular in Mexico, and the loss of territory is still seen as a national humiliation. Now check out the series in the description for more historical tales. Many view the war as an example of American imperialism and the United States as an aggressor that expanded its territory through military force. Others argue that the war was a necessary step in the inevitable clash between two powerful nations, and that the outcome was simply a matter of time. Regardless of one's perspective, the war's legacy continues to shape the relationship between the United States and Mexico. Issues such as immigration, the border, cultural identity, and national memory are all deeply intertwined with the history of the Mexican-American War. The war may have ended with the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, but its consequences continue to be felt today. While the war is taught in U.S. history classes, it receives far less attention than other conflicts like the Revolutionary War or the Civil War. And yet, few wars in American history are as consequential. It fundamentally changed the demographics and the geography of the United States, setting the stage for westward expansion and the eventual displacement of Native Americans. The war also left a lasting impact on the relationship between the United States and Mexico, which continues to shape the two nations today. Its economy was devastated, and millions of ethnic Mexicans now found themselves living under American rule. However, the war's legacy was more complicated than outright defeat. The war was costly. An estimated 13,000 Americans died from combat-related illnesses and injuries, while hundreds of thousands of Mexicans lost their lives. The war also inflamed political divisions within the United States. While the acquisition of new territories increased the national size, it also intensified the debate over slavery. The question of whether the new territories would allow slavery ultimately contributed to the start of the Civil War just over a decade later. Some historians argue that the war strengthened Mexican nationalism and created a shared identity out of the disparate regional factions. The war also had profound implications for the United States. Massive land acquisition doubled the nation's size and fulfilled the dream of manifest destiny, securing America's position as a continental power. Access to the Pacific Ocean also promised economic and strategic benefits for decades to come. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo did not fully resolve all border disputes. In 1854, the United States negotiated the Gadsden Purchase, acquiring additional land in southern Arizona and southwestern New Mexico for $10 million. The land was needed for a southern transcontinental railroad, but it also finalized the modern U.S.-Mexico border. This marked the end of U.S. territorial expansion in the continental mainland and the final piece of the puzzle, shaped by war, but it was also extremely diverse. Ruled by a succession of foreign powers, and populated by thousands of American settlers. These settlers looked to Fremont as a liberator. On June 13, 1846, the Bear Flag Revolt officially made California an independent republic, but their joy was short-lived. The U.S. did not recognize the Bear Flag Republic, and President Polk ordered Fremont to return to U.S. rule. He did the order. He seized the Mexican governor's palace and declared the region part of the United States. Later that month, American naval forces took control of Monterey Bay, and the revolt was over before it even started. California was not truly free. It was simply transferred from one imperial power to another. Only Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the island of Florida remained. But the former colonies were not as independent as they appeared. All of them, except for the original 13 states, had been incorporated into the United States through a series of wars and purchases. The U.S. claimed much of the western half of the continent, and so when Mexico won independence from the Spanish in 1821, Americans suspected this situation would not last. In fact, some wanted to conquer Mexico itself and add it to the Union. They dreamed of a vast U.S. empire stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Many viewed the loss of territory as an open wound, and resentment toward the United States simmered for generations. Much of the country believed that Texas was rightfully Mexican, even after declaring independence in 1836 and joining the U.S. as a state 2 years later. The dispute created a powder keg along the Rio Grande and the Sabine River. Soon, a diplomatic incident would set off a chain reaction. In the United States, expansionists were thrilled, but debates over slavery erupted immediately. His intention was clear: provoke a fight with Mexico as soon as the inevitable battle began. Polk could declare war and seize Texas. Taylor advanced to the Rio Grande, but a full-scale invasion required more troops. Polk turned to General Winfield Scott, who landed in Veracruz and marched toward Mexico City. Meanwhile, another American force moved west from New Mexico. The campaign was swift. Within months, Scott had captured the capital. Mexican forces under General Santa Anna repeatedly tried to stop him, but were no match for the better trained and equipped Americans. Would the new territories allow slavery? The question inflamed tensions between North and South, pushing the U.S. toward civil war just over a decade later. The war also brought military fame to many future Civil War leaders. Ulysses S. Grant, Robert E. Lee, Thomas Stonewall Jackson, and George B. McClellan all served in Mexico. The tactics and lessons they learned would resurface against each other on American soil. Mexico, reeling from the devastation, was in political disarray. Santa Anna had fled, and a provisional government took power. Negotiations began in earnest in early 1848. The American diplomat Nicholas Trist, despite being recalled by President Polk, stayed in Mexico and continued to negotiate with the Mexican authorities. Trist defied Polk's orders, believing a just peace was within reach, and he was right. On February 2, 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed. It marked the formal end of the Mexican-American War and drastically reshaped North America. The treaty's provisions were monumental. Mexico recognized the Rio Grande as the southern border of Texas. The U.S. acquired more than 500,000 square miles of territory, including present-day California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming. The U.S. agreed to pay Mexico $15 million and assumed $3.25 million in debts owed by Mexico to American citizens. This massive land acquisition, known as the Mexican Cession, fulfilled the dream of manifest destiny, giving the U.S. access to the Pacific and confirming its status as a continental power. The treaty was ratified by both countries, but not without controversy, though not widely remembered today. The war was a brutal conflict that pitted brother against brother, American against American, Mexican against Mexican. But Mexico had other plans, despite being impoverished, mismanaged, and politically unstable. Mexico was determined to protect its hard-won independence. In 1845, President Polk sent troops under General Zachary Taylor to the disputed area between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande. And then there was John C. Fremont. He led a small band of soldiers on a whirlwind campaign in California. As the fighting drew to a close, it became clear that the conflict was unwinnable. For Mexico, the war and the resulting treaty were a disaster. Today, the legacy of the Mexican-American War is contested and complex. For Mexico, the war has never been forgotten. The Mexican-American War is often characterized as an easy American victory, but that's not entirely accurate. Perhaps the most controversial aspect of the Mexican-American War is the way in which the United States acquired its new territories. To learn more about the Mexican-American War, visit the provided resources. In the heart of what was once an empire, we find ourselves at the border wall, a line dividing not just land, but cultures, histories, dreams. This concrete divider cuts across the lives of millions, shaping their days and destinies. On either side stands a sentry, a silent witness to the drama that unfolds here daily. But the US-Mexican War, as it came to be known, was more than that. The path is fraught with challenges, from inhospitable terrain to disease-ridden swamps. But Taylor's determination knows no bounds. He presses on, determined to secure victories that will shape the destiny of nations. The objective? The capture of Mexico City. Scott's journey is a testament to military prowess, culminating in the decisive Battle of Chapultepec. Imagine being a Mexican farmer tilling your land near the border, watching as American soldiers march across your fields. Or picture an African-American enslaved in Texas, caught in the crossfire of a war that promises freedom, but at what cost? These individual stories, often overshadowed by the grand narratives of nations. What will be the fate of the Mexicans who call this area home? Drawn by the promise of new opportunities, they head west, carrying with them their hopes and dreams. It is a place where cultures converge, where languages blend, and where dreams are nurtured despite the challenges. From the early days of conflict to the present day, the legacy of the war continues to shape immigration policies, economic partnerships, and cultural exchanges between the United States and Mexico. The issue of immigration, the ebb and flow of people across the border, becomes a source of contention. If you found this video insightful, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe for more historical tales. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and above all, keep embracing the richness of our shared human history. Policies are crafted and reformed, each step met with passionate debate, but they are not the only ones seeking a better life. The US-Mexican War should serve as a reminder of the devastating consequences of conflict, the importance of cultural understanding, and the need for empathy and justice in shaping our world. It is a place where the echoes of the past resonate in the present, reminding us of the challenges we have overcome and the work that still lies ahead. The Bracero program allows Mexican workers to temporarily work in the United States, addressing labor shortages while providing income to Mexican families. However, the program also exposes the harsh realities of migrant labor, including exploitation and discrimination. The US-Mexican War may have ended, but its ramifications reverberate through time, influencing generations to come. With Mexico City on the brink, peace negotiations begin. The construction of border walls, the debate over amnesty for undocumented immigrants, the result, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which alters the course of history. Mexico is forced to cede vast territories, including California and New Mexico, to the United States. The price of war is immense, but the impact of this treaty even greater. Meanwhile, in the heart of Mexico City, the government braces for the coming storm. They know that defending their nation's honor and integrity will be a Herculean task. Picture yourself in the year 1846. The United States, driven by the ideology of manifest destiny, believed it had a God-given right to expand across the North American continent. From Taylor's strategic brilliance at the Battle of Buena Vista to Santa Anna's valiant stand at the Alamo, the war takes a heavy toll on both sides. On the other side stood Mexico, fiercely protective of its hard-won independence and its vast territory. The stage was set for a conflict that would not only change maps, but also shape the destinies of two nations. Behind them lies a past that refuses to stay buried. Enter Texas, a territory claimed by both Mexico and the United States. The issue, whether Texas is a part of Mexico or an independent republic, tensions are high as both sides vie for control. Then comes the catalyst, a skirmish near the disputed border. Suddenly, the question is no longer about diplomacy, but about dominance. Their paths intertwined during the 19th century, in a war that would forever alter the course of history. But before we delve into the heart of this conflict, let's take a moment to appreciate the intricate tapestry that surrounds us. from the bustling cities to the tranquil homes along the Rio Grande. And yet, like a forgotten melody, the echoes of the past resonate through this landscape, shaping the present and casting shadows on the future. In the annals of history, wars are often remembered as clashes of armies, victories, and defeats. Now let's travel back in time to the 19th century and explore how these two titans collided. As the conflict rages, General Zachary Taylor marches his troops southward. Amidst the chaos and carnage of battle, stories of heroism emerge. As the war reaches its climax, the United States, led by General Winfield Scott, sets its sights on the very heart of Mexico. From the ashes of war, two realities emerge. The United States emerges as a continental power stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific. In the aftermath of the war, the United States finds itself at a crossroads. The story doesn't end at the Rio Grande. It extends to the personal narratives of those who lived through this tumultuous period. In the decades following the war, the borderland becomes a magnet for settlers from the United States. As the 20th century dawns, the borderland transforms. Cities grow, infrastructure develops, and the region becomes a hub of economic activity. But beneath this progress, tensions simmer. The mid-20th century brings new challenges and opportunities. In recent times, the borderland has become a flashpoint in the national discourse. Today, the borderland stands as a testament to the enduring spirit of humanity. As we reflect on the history of the US-Mexican border, we are reminded of the profound impact of war and the resilience of the human spirit. But this story is not just about the past. It is deeply intertwined with our present and will continue to influence our future. As we look ahead, it is crucial to remember the lessons of history. It is a story worth remembering, discussing, and learning from, so that we can build a better future together.